Molweni, good day conference. My name is Nandi Jola. I'm a South African born poet, storyteller, and playwright, and I live in Northern Ireland. And I've lived here for the past 20 years. I wish to thank Speaking Volumes, Live Literature, and Breaking Ground for this amazing opportunity to be speaking here at this year's conference for Afro-Europe's 2022. As a Black woman who lives in Northern Ireland, I was aware that I was moving into a post-conflict society, having moved from South Africa's apartheid to post-troubles Northern Ireland. I knew that the themes that I was writing about were difficult themes, themes of emigrating, identity, home, and belonging. Irish people are not strangers to those themes, but how I myself were bringing those themes to people that were trying to heal themselves was very important. So I had to thread very carefully about my own experiences, but also listen very carefully to people's experiences. And I was so fortunate to get a writing contract or a deal and publish my first collection of poems. And in these poems, I think they embody those experiences. So the title of this collection is called Home is Neither Here Nor There. And for me, I think that title is very important because at times I ask myself, where is home? And I'm sure people who have migrated somewhere else or people who have immigrated will know what that means and what that feels like. So I'm going to open up with the poem Arrivals, which is in this book. And I think this poem will set the tone of what I've been speaking about in my journey through these poems and what I'll be talking and touching on to you today. So, Arrivals. We came in our rags with smiles and full of hope, unpacked into our matchbox homes in places called Spring Farm, with places of our exotic places and things fixed on walls. Then we ventured out into the reality. Through interfaces we crossed, called foreigners, sometimes welcomed, not mentioning our religion or gods. We danced, we sang, in our gay clothes, selling our culture, waking the bones of this troubled city. So as I've said, Northern Ireland has been home to me for the past 20 years. But in those 20 years, I suppose I've seen a lot of change in terms of how it has transitioned into a peaceful place. But also not to say that there has not been any challenges. We've seen challenges with Brexit. We've seen challenges with racism. At one stage, Northern Ireland was labeled as the race capital of Europe. So how I've responded to those themes, being an African, was looking at what I was doing here as a creative, as a writer, and what I was responding to. For the past decade, for example, I've worked in schools as a cultural awareness ambassador. And to me, the message was to take out the positive of what I had to bring and also what I have had. So for me, those experiences were intertwined and were the way of me trying to show a Northern Ireland that was moving forward with its diverse communities, with its ethnic minority communities, what literature meant to us and what also literature meant to people who lived in Northern Ireland. For example, when I went back to Queen's University to do a master's degree in poetry, I was not interested merely on African or African Americans poets and writers. I was also interested in writers like Kieran Carson and Seamus Heaney and Maeve McGuckin and Moira Donaldson. I was interested to learn not about Belfast, but Ireland of Ireland. To me, how these islands were broken up, but also how people have worked together to bring them together in writing, because writing has no borders, writing has no limitations, and how language evolved. As somebody who is a translingual, who speaks more than two languages, what words were connecting me to the city? Was the city for me? Was I writing about me, or was I writing about the experiences that were connecting me? And all of these things, I suppose, show them in the writing. But also, I find that the host community or the host society that I live in also identifies that all these issues are interconnected and entwined. For example, in 2021, the Arts Council of Northern Ireland commissioned me to write a poem for Brussels Transposee Poetry Festival, and to respond, I suppose, for me, what the body embodies about movement. And in the next poem that I'm going to read, Anthropology, which is about those experiences. So when I look at immigration, I don't look at it from a human's perspective. I also looked at it from the animals and what relationship we have to the climate and what damage we have caused to the climate. So I kind of looked at this poem from an insect's perspective, and I embodied that to us as humans. So the poem is called Entomology. Our bodies are wiretaps carried by a cuboid vessel into the viscera of sphere, like weevils bare to illumination, leaning on the nearest thing, the thing that is itinerant of the two dimensions at the speed of light, transporting us through quotidian noise. And I suppose for them, the most important word there was the transport. But when we look at ourselves as bodies and how we transport our work, how we transport our words from our mouths to the ears to also the page. And for me, then, being visible in Northern Ireland as a Black woman has been a challenge, but also wanted to venture out into Europe and look at how the language, my language, Xhosa, can be intertwined with other languages, Italian, for example, French, for example. So the next examples is my work being visible, for example, in the Poetry Jukebox, which was in France, with the James Joyce program there in the Cultural Andreas Center, and how that language being there as an ambiguity itself, even though the project was called Ambiguities, how ambiguous was language used in the space, just for being in the space and being visible. To me, as an Afropean, that's what's important, is to getting our bodies, our voices, our pages on places and spaces that maybe were not designed for us at the beginning. I did a program there with UCD where it's a project of writing our work, because writing is something that is going to be probably be lost, and we're going to be in the world of technology, and how handwriting poems is now going to be something of an archive. So with the project I did for UCD of voicing our poems and recording these poems for the future generation, and for me that's important. So it's things like that, and it's projects that I intertwine myself to. So coming back to going to Italy and Europe and working, for example, this summer in Bologna, in Lettere, where my poems were translated into Italian, a language that I can't read, a language that I can't speak, but seeing my poems in those languages is, to me, what belonging is people trying to understand words, trying to translate. So coming back to the point I was trying to make about being a translingual writer and thinking in those terms, I have a poem, for example, that I will read later, called Black Irish, and how we see ourselves in spaces and how we are visible in those spaces, but also trying to understand the language English, which now is common language, was also a colonial language, and how we have adopted to that language, and how we now use that language as a medium of trying to give a message out as writers and also as Afro-Europeans about our own stories. And I think it's very important that we use the medium of English to tell our stories, because that language is now something which is universal, but also that language can be also used as a weapon to deliver exactly the message that we want to deliver. So the next poem which I wanted to read was Black Irish. And this poem came about because now I have a daughter who was born here, and to me, what does that mean? What does it mean to be Black in Ireland? Does it mean that you're an Irish? Does it mean you are a Black Irish? And the reason why this has prompted this title is, when you look at forms that we have to fill in, we have to look at immigration, how immigration, sift us into categories of humans and equal opportunities, as they say sometimes, and disguises diversity, how we keep ticking boxes. And this is poem to me explains just that. Black Irish. We met at sea in Cape Agulhas, the infinite world running in confluence. 8 ante meridium, a boy on a bus number 11 translates to his mother like a needle on a thread waving in and out of English and Swahili. A nun taps the woman on the shoulder. Habari, habari yako, hello, how are you? Then they speak for the rest of the journey through their habit and hijab. The boy's limb stretches towards the bell between prams, stairs, and moist breath of an early bus. She struts and bellows below pale faces to the halt of the bus. This is what Irish means, she thinks to herself, strangers speaking to you in Swahili, and a child that thinks his father was from the falls. So, conference, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. But just to close, I wanted to close with this poignant poem because I believe that this is what we're trying to work in our own identities, but also in our writing to try and understand what it is to be Black and also to be a European. So The Empire's Children is my last poem. The Empire's Children. We are fighting a war with our guilt for raising children who don't know their gods. Some of us argue that colonization was not bad after all, that it left a legacy of roads, bridges, and hospitals and prisons. Dead tracks covered in tar, rondavels replaced with matchbox homes, kraals for roundabouts. Wells have dried up, the men have fled to the city, abandoning crops of maize, chickens, and their grandfathers' wishes, leaving the cattle and the land in the hand of the colonizers, coughed up by dinghy boats, begging for bread, filling up more prisons for free labor and for hope of a British passport. Thank you very much. Ngose kakhulu.